Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
You'd think that after 42 years of being the one who always showed up early, stayed late, and kept her mouth shut when things got weird, maybe, just maybe, someone would notice. Not with applause or a damn medal, but at least with a glance. A word. Hey, I see you. But at the Reynolds family reunion last Saturday, the only time anyone noticed me was when I carried the folding chairs back into the church basement while Kyle, my cousin, the golden boy himself, talked about scaling up his business and smiled like he'd just invented something that'd change the world. The heat that day was thick as soup, and my back already hurt from hauling tubs of potato salad out of the van when Mom waved me over to refill the lemonade, whispering, "Make it look nice, Hannah. There's plastic cups with the gold rims in the third bin." Like this whole thing was a wedding, not a paper plate, Dollar Tree decorated family event next to a highway. She didn't ask how my week had been or if business was going well. She just pointed, and I went. Like I always do. I saw Kyle walk in an hour late, sunglasses still on his head, even though we were indoors, buttoned down just a little too crisp, like he wanted everyone to know he was important. People actually clapped. Clapped. Like his presence was a gift we'd all been waiting for. Aunt Linda practically vibrated with joy as she swooped in to hug him, her voice all high and fluttery as she said, "My boy. Just flew in from Dallas. Didn't sleep a wink." The hustle never stops, right, sweetie? She looked around to make sure everyone heard that part. The hustle never stops. God forbid we forget he was out there hustling. Doing big things. Mom looked over and smiled the way I hadn't seen her smile in years. You know that kind of smile that creeps in slow, like it's coming up from your ribs and curling across your whole damn face? That smile wasn't for me. It never had been. I poured lemonade with shaky hands and stood next to the cooler while people asked Kyle how his startup was doing, what round of funding he was in, whether he was still consulting for that big-name company. No one said the name. And I'm pretty sure he never actually gave it, but oh, he played the part. All charm. All polish. And there was Mom, right in the middle of it, telling anyone who'd listen how proud she was of him. "He's always had that spark," she said, putting a hand on his back like she was the one who raised him. And maybe that was the moment the itch started. The one under your skin that doesn't stop until something bleeds. Because I stood there, not 5 feet away, and she didn't mention me. Not once. Not the business I'd built from the ground up. Not the fact that I'd been keeping our family afloat during the lockdown, cleaning houses when no one else would, paying her power bill more times than I could count. I was just there. Silent. Folding chairs. At the end of the night, when most of the food was picked over and the sun was starting to dip low, casting long tired shadows across the parking lot, I started stacking plates and taking down the decorations while Kyle took selfies with Aunt Linda and his newest girlfriend, someone named Marissa or Melissa, didn't catch it, who looked bored the whole time, scrolling on her phone like she was waiting for something better to happen. I carried the last tray out to the van, feeling the tired settle into my bones, and when I came back inside, I overheard Mom saying to someone, "Kyle's got such a bright future. You can just tell when someone's going places." I didn't hear a word about me. I never do. That night, when I finally got home, kicked off my shoes, and sank into the worn-out couch that creaks a little on the left side, I poured myself a glass of wine I couldn't really afford and tried to forget the way her eyes sparkled when she looked at him. I had just started scrolling mindlessly through my phone when the message came in from Kyle, of all people. "Mom's crying in the garage." What happened? I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what to say. I typed back, slowly, word by word. "You should ask your mom about 1997. And then I put my phone down, leaned back into the silence of my little house, and listened to the ice melt in my glass. Because the truth is, sometimes you don't need to blow up a house to burn it down. Sometimes all it takes is lighting a single match and walking away. And that message? That was my match. It's funny how the past doesn't ever really stay buried, no matter how many casseroles you stack on top of it, no matter how loudly you pretend everything's fine. No matter how many years pass with people smiling at each other across picnic tables as if they weren't all carrying 1,000 pounds of unsaid things in their chests. I didn't sleep much the night Kyle sent that message. It sat in my phone like a ghost, glowing faintly on the nightstand, and even though I didn't respond again, I knew something had cracked open, and I knew I wasn't going to be the one scrambling to patch it shut. The thing is, when I told him to ask about 1997, I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't guessing. I knew exactly what had happened, or at least enough of it to know that whatever glossy version of his life Kyle thought was real, it was built on a foundation of half-truths and strategically buried moments. And that year, that one moment in time, was when the whole damn thing started unraveling, at least for me. I was 14 when it happened, and looking back, I think that was the year I stopped believing that adults knew what they were doing. It was at my cousin Jenny's wedding, Aunt Linda's daughter, the older one, the one who moved to Oregon and never really came back, and everything looked perfect on the outside. Lace tablecloths, peach-colored roses, a chocolate fountain that the little kids kept sticking their fingers into when no one was watching. But I remember stepping behind the church to sneak a Sprite from the cooler, and that's when I saw her, Aunt Linda, sitting on the back step of the building, shoes off, mascara smudged, a bottle of champagne between her knees, and a cigarette dangling from fingers that were shaking. She didn't see me at first. She was whispering to herself, something soft and broken-sounding, and I remember thinking she looked like someone who'd just lost something really important, something she wasn't allowed to grieve out loud. I didn't mean to listen, but I froze, because her voice, low and trembling, was saying things like, "It was only one time and Karen can never know," and then, clear as day, "Rick doesn't ask questions, but if she finds out, she'll take him from me." That last part stuck with me, not just because I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but because the fear in her voice wasn't about guilt, it was about control, about something she was desperately trying to hold on to. I backed away before she noticed me, and I never told anyone what I heard. Not then. Not when Kyle started looking more and more like someone who didn't quite belong in the Reynolds gene pool. Not when Aunt Linda got weirdly protective every time someone made jokes about who Kyle took after. I just folded it up like a letter I didn't know how to read and tucked it into the back of my mind. But some memories get louder the older you get, and that moment, her voice, that champagne bottle, the cigarette trembling in the dark, that one never shut up. So the next morning, after tossing and turning and replaying Kyle's message over and over in my head, I got dressed, drove across town, and parked outside the old medical plaza on Sycamore where I knew the old women's clinic used to be. It was mostly boarded up now, graffiti on the windows and weeds growing through the cracks in the sidewalk, but a hand-painted sign still clung to the glass, "Retired nurse on site, ring for appointments." Her name was Marlene. I remembered her because she used to have this thick cloud of white curls and a habit of calling every woman under 60 sweetheart. She answered the door after I rang the little rusted bell, peered at me like I was a stranger selling Jesus, and then, when I told her who I was and why I was there, something shifted behind her eyes. Not suspicion, recognition. "You're Karen's girl, aren't you?" she asked, already stepping aside to let me in. "Thought you looked familiar. You had the same serious little face when you were knee-high." I didn't waste time. I told her I was looking for some old records, something from back in '97 involving my Aunt Linda. She didn't ask why, and I didn't volunteer. She walked over to a box of old folders that looked like they hadn't been touched since the Clinton administration and flipped through them until she pulled out a name. Linda Reynolds. March 25th, 1997. Yep, she was here. Then she looked up at me, eyes narrowing just slightly. But I remember it wasn't a routine checkup. She didn't say more, not directly. Nurses like her knew how to talk in half-truths without ever breaking any rules. But she told me enough, that Aunt Linda had come in alone, flustered, talking too fast, and very clearly hiding something. And then she added something I hadn't expected. There was a man. Not Rick. Younger. Nervous. I remember because he paid in cash and kept looking over his shoulder like someone was about to bust in. I asked if she remembered anything else, and she just said she was crying when she left. Kept saying it was all a mistake. That she couldn't let her sister find out. That it'd ruin everything. That was the moment it all clicked. Not in a dramatic, movie-style revelation, but in that quiet, sickening way that creeps up your spine when a puzzle you've been sitting with for years finally snaps into place, and you realize the picture it makes isn't just messy, it's dangerous. Back home, I opened the old sewing box in Mom's closet, the one she always told me to leave alone because it was full of junk. At the very bottom, beneath spools of thread and dull scissors and a button tin that probably dated back to the 70s, I found it, an envelope. Yellowed, crinkled, with handwriting that looked older than I remembered. It said, "Paternity, do not open." And inside, still sealed, was a folded document that suddenly felt radioactive in my hands. I didn't open it. Not yet. Not because I was scared of what it would say, but because I wanted them to sit with the not knowing the way I had for years, for decades. Let them feel that same pressure, that same crawling sensation in their stomachs that I'd lived with every time I walked into a room and watched them look through me like I was a shadow. Because sometimes revenge doesn't come with shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes it starts with silence and the careful way you put old things back exactly where you found them, so when someone finally discovers them, it feels like they were always meant to be seen. And trust me, this was just the beginning. There's a strange kind of loneliness that settles in your chest when you finally realize you were never the person your own mother hoped you'd become, not because you failed her or because life turned you bitter or jaded, but because somewhere along the line, she quietly started hoping for someone else instead, someone who wasn't you at all. It's the kind of loneliness that doesn't come with tears or dramatics, just an aching clarity that rolls in like a tide you've been watching for years, and when it finally hits, you don't even flinch, you just brace. After finding that envelope, I started looking at everything differently, not just Kyle, not just Aunt Linda, but Mom too, because suddenly, her behavior over the last 2 decades made an unnervingly sharp kind of sense. Every over-the-top compliment she threw at Kyle during holiday dinners, every photo of him she insisted on printing and framing even though half of them were just him standing next to someone famous at a conference or shaking hands in front of a banner. Every time she sighed and said, "He's really going places," while I sat across the table with calloused hands and the kind of bone-deep fatigue you only get from cleaning houses 6 days a week, those weren't just signs of favoritism. They were signs of something deeper, something more unsettling, like maybe, just maybe, she saw him as something she lost, or worse, something she almost had. So I decided to test the waters. Not by accusing, not by throwing that envelope on the kitchen table like a bomb, but by gently probing, inching toward the edge of whatever cliff she'd been tiptoeing along all these years. I invited her to lunch at that diner she liked, the one with the pies she pretends are too sweet but always finishes anyway, and I picked a corner booth where the noise of silverware and waitresses calling out orders would drown out anything too heavy. I waited until halfway through her coffee refill before I asked her directly, "Mom, do you ever think you were too hard on me growing up?" She looked up slowly, blinking like I'd just switched the lighting in the room. "What a question," she said, smiling the way people do when they want to shut something down with fake warmth. "You were always the easy one. Didn't need pushing." That line hit like a slap disguised as a compliment. The easy one. The one who didn't need praise, encouragement, affection, just quiet acceptance that no matter what I did, it would never sparkle the way Kyle's made-up LinkedIn resume did. I let the silence hang for a moment, let her sit with it, and then I said, "You ever think Kyle needed too much from everyone?" She didn't laugh. She didn't defend him either. She just stirred her coffee slowly, eyes never leaving the spoon, and said, "Kyle's always had ambition. He makes people feel excited. That's rare these days." I wanted to scream, honestly. Not because I hate Kyle, he's infuriating, sure, but not evil, but because it suddenly felt like I was talking to someone who had emotionally adopted a child who wasn't hers, invested in him, built him up in her mind into some glowing success story, while I had been standing 3 feet away for the last 20 years, holding the toolbox, patching drywall, paying her damn electric bill when Kyle's fancy ventures pivoted and landed in the dirt. So I nodded. I didn't argue. I told her I had to run errands and left her with the check. The next time I saw Kyle, It was purely by chance or maybe fate, depending on how sentimental you are about timing. He pulled into the gas station just as I was stepping out of the store with a gallon of milk and a bag of off-brand tortilla chips. He smiled when he saw me, but it was smaller than usual, less sure, like he'd started connecting some dots in the background and didn't like what the picture was becoming. He leaned against his car and said, "Hey, got a sec?" I didn't, not really, but I said yes because I could tell he was working up to something, and if I've learned anything, it's that people will always show their cards if you stay quiet long enough. He rubbed the back of his neck like a teenager about to ask for a loan and said, "So, I've been trying to get this new thing off the ground, sort of a pivot into product consulting, and I've got some investors interested. But I'm trying to make sure everything looks solid on paper. You wouldn't maybe be interested in helping me out with a short-term bridge loan?" The audacity of it all almost made me laugh. Bridge loan. That's what they're calling it now. I looked him in the eye and said, "You know I clean houses for a living, right? I don't exactly have a fund set aside for bullshit." He winced, just a little, but didn't argue. That's how I knew he was desperate. I didn't say no, though. I just said, "I'll think about it," and walked back to my car, milk sweating through the plastic bag. Because I had an idea forming. Not a plan, not yet, but the outline of something. Something that would require patience, timing, and just the right moment to twist the knife. And no, I didn't mean literally. I'm not that kind of woman. But sometimes the right truth, in the right mouth, at the right time, can do more damage than any blade. Later that week, I found myself driving past the house where the retired nurse, Marlene, had lived, wondering if I should go back and ask her more, press a little harder. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I already knew what I needed to know. And more importantly, I knew that Aunt Linda and Mom had been sitting on something for decades, and it wasn't going to take much to make it slide out from under them. The fear was already there. I'd seen it in Mom's eyes at the diner, in Kyle's stiff smile at the gas station. I didn't need the paternity test to speak for me. I just needed them to know I had it. Because there's something deliciously cruel about not saying the thing out loud. About letting someone else fill in the blanks with their own guilty memories. It lets them do all the work for you, unraveling, doubting, second-guessing every decision they've made. It's cleaner that way. More satisfying. And as I watched the sun set behind my windshield and thought about all the times I'd let myself be the one who cleaned up after everyone else's messes, I realized this was the first time I wasn't going to lift a finger. Let them clean up this one. If they even can. There's a particular kind of satisfaction that comes from watching someone squirm under the weight of a truth they can't quite see yet, but can feel pressing in from all sides, like walking into a room that smells like smoke long before anyone notices the flames. And instead of yelling fire, you just sit back, cross your legs, and wait to see who starts sweating first. That's exactly the atmosphere I was building, piece by piece, not with lies, not with manipulation, but with silence so intentional it started to feel heavier than any accusation I could have thrown out. Because what I was doing now wasn't about confrontation, it was about pressure. Slow, tightening, quiet pressure. It started with a text, casually worded but laced with enough subtext to turn Aunt Linda's afternoon upside down. I wrote, "Hey, thinking it's time we all got together, just as cousins and our moms. Coffee? Catch up." She replied with a cautious, almost delayed, "Sure. Sounds nice. Kyle too." I said yes, naturally, because what was the point of a stage without the star actor? I picked a neutral place, not too public, but not private enough for anyone to blow up without witnesses, a quiet cafe tucked behind an antique shop, the kind where the chairs don't match and the tea tastes like flowers, and old people play cards at the back table without looking up. I showed up first, sat by the window, and ordered something sweet and forgettable. I wore my best poker face, calm and unreadable, the way people wear a nice coat to a funeral, something soft to cover the bone-deep satisfaction of knowing the guest of honor doesn't realize they're about to be buried. Kyle arrived 5 minutes late, as always, with that breezy half-apology he delivers with a smile that never quite reaches his eyes when he's nervous. Aunt Linda trailed in behind him, makeup a little heavier than usual, jaw tight, like she hadn't slept right since the garage. We made small talk at first, weather, gas prices, someone's new baby, but I didn't rush it. You don't slam the brakes on a train this size. You guide it into the crash so slowly that everyone still thinks they're in control right up until the moment the steel starts bending. I waited until Aunt Linda had taken her second sip of tea, and then I leaned back casually and said, "You know what's crazy? Everyone's doing DNA tests now. I keep seeing those kits on sale. Thought about ordering one, just to see if we've got anything weird in the family tree." The silence was brief, but surgical. Aunt Linda froze mid-sip, blinked twice, and set her cup down so carefully it clinked against the saucer like a warning bell. Kyle raised his eyebrows, confused, clearly not picking up what I was laying down, and said, "Yeah, I've been meaning to try one. Might be cool to see if we've got royalty somewhere." Aunt Linda gave a breathy, nervous laugh, too sharp around the edges, and mumbled something about those things not being very accurate. I didn't push. That wasn't the point. I just smiled and shrugged and changed the subject, letting the idea simmer in her mind like a slow-boiling pot she couldn't take her eyes off. Carl didn't notice, of course. He was too busy talking about some new networking opportunity he had lined up in Denver, another meeting, another investor, another maybe that he was trying to puff into a certainty with charm and buzzwords. I nodded politely, asked questions I didn't care about, and watched his mother slowly unravel without a single direct accusation. That night, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I drove to Mom's house under the soft blanket of dusk, the sky bruised with fading sunlight, the kind of evening where everything feels slightly suspended, where truth and lies hang in the air like smoke before a storm. She was in the kitchen, folding towels that didn't need folding, humming a song from a commercial she probably didn't even realize she remembered. I talked about nothing at first, the neighbors, the weather, a recipe I tried that turned out bland. Then, as casually as someone setting down a grocery list, I placed the unopened envelope from the sewing box on the dining room table. I didn't mention it. I didn't gesture. I just left it there, slightly off-center, where it would catch her eye without needing to be pointed at, and I walked over to the sink to rinse out my cup like it was any other Tuesday. I heard the sound of her breath catch, so soft it could have been imagined, but I didn't turn around. She didn't say a word, and neither did I. When I left, the envelope was still sitting there, untouched, unopened, glowing with the threat of exposure. By the time I got home, I already had a new message from Kyle. "What the hell is going on? My mom's been crying in the garage for 2 hours." I stared at the screen, unsurprised, then set the phone down and took my time pouring a glass of wine, letting the silence in the room settle into the corners like company I'd been expecting all week. Because that was the real trick, not to deliver a revelation, but to make them feel the weight of not knowing what I knew. To let them start running down their own mental hallways, checking doors they locked decades ago, wondering which one I'd managed to open. I didn't need to spell it out. They were already doing the math, chasing timelines, remembering glances and hushed conversations and things they thought no one had seen. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. I wasn't setting fire to anything, not yet. I was just handing them the match and watching who reached for it first. What people don't understand is that the most effective revenge is rarely loud or immediate. It's slow. It's precise. It's made of restraint and patience and the kind of sharp-edged truths that sit just under the surface like broken glass in shallow water. And after all these years of being the one who cleaned up everyone else's messes, I finally realized I didn't have to fix a damn thing. I just had to let them drown in it. There's a distinct heaviness that settles over a family in the moments before something is said that can't be taken back, and though most people would swear they never saw it coming, the truth is it always lingers there, just beneath the surface, woven into the way people hesitate before they speak, the way they look too long at nothing in particular, and the way silence grows loud enough to drown out everything else. I felt that heaviness thick in the air the moment I pulled into my mother's driveway 3 days after I left the envelope on her dining room table. The curtains were drawn tighter than usual, the porch light flicked on in broad daylight like a nervous tick, and even the birds seemed to keep their distance, as if the house itself had begun to exhale something sour. She opened the door before I knocked, her eyes glassy and unreadable, Her mouth twisted into a neutral shape that looked practiced, like she had stood in front of the mirror rehearsing it until it didn't betray a thing. She stepped aside without a word and let me in, her robe tied a little too tight, her fingers white at the knuckles. The envelope was gone. Nothing had exploded, no phone calls, no confrontations, no long-winded messages left on my voicemail. But I knew it had been read. I could see it in her posture, in the way she didn't offer coffee or ask about my day, in the way she sat down stiffly and looked at the carpet like it held all the answers she couldn't say out loud. "You knew," she said, finally, after what felt like hours of silence stretched across a single minute. "Or you guessed?" I didn't rush to answer because I wanted her to sit with the weight of the question. I watched her squirm the way I had so many times before, pretending not to notice that I wasn't the daughter she wanted, that the air between us had been getting thinner for years. When I did speak, I kept my voice even and low, not angry, just resolute. "I didn't guess," I said. "I remembered. I listened. You just never thought I'd put the pieces together." She flinched a little, the way someone does when the pain they've been holding in finally gets named. She didn't deny it. She didn't throw out some half-truth to distract me. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap and started talking like she had been carrying the words in her chest for decades, wrapped in cotton and guilt and that same cold ambition that made her smile so brightly whenever Kyle walked into a room. "It was one time," she said, and I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of course that's what people always say when they're trying to shrink a wound into something manageable. As if one time could possibly explain years of secrets and glances and secondhand dreams. He wasn't supposed to be mine. But when Linda told me, when she came to me crying, I think some part of me wanted him to be. There it was. The thing she had never said out loud. The quiet betrayal that had shaped our entire family dynamic from the moment it was born in whispers and denial. She looked at me then, really looked at me, as if trying to measure just how much damage she had done without ever laying a hand on me. "I loved you," she said, almost defensively, like it was a fact she had to insist on before I took it away from her. "You were always strong. You never needed all that. You never asked for attention. You just did what needed doing. And that's why you gave it to him?" I asked, more tired than bitter. "Because he asked?" She didn't answer, and that was answer enough. There was something pathetic in the way she shrank into herself, as if she thought honesty would redeem her now. But I didn't come for redemption. I came for reckoning. That afternoon, I called Kyle, not to accuse, not to scold, but to finish what I had started. I told him we needed to talk, and for once, he didn't put it off or suggest we catch up next week. He met me at a quiet park on the edge of town, away from the places where either of us might run into someone who could ask questions. He looked older than I remembered, not physically, but in the way his shoulders seemed to fold in on themselves, the way he kept glancing around like he was waiting for the sky to fall. "Is it true?" he asked before I could speak. "My mom won't talk to me. She keeps saying she doesn't know anything for sure, that it was a mistake, that I shouldn't go digging where there's nothing to find." "What do you believe?" I asked, watching him closely. "I don't know what to believe," he admitted. "But I keep thinking about all those times your mom looked at me like I was hers." I didn't confirm it. I didn't hand him the paperwork or show him the envelope or repeat any of what my mother had said. Instead, I told him what mattered. "You've been lied to," I said. "So have I. But the difference is, you got the love that should have been mine. You got the encouragement, the applause, the admiration. I got the silence, the expectations, the bills." He didn't defend himself, which I almost respected. He just sat there, looking smaller than he ever had, the golden boy whose shine had finally worn off. "What do I do now?" he asked, and it sounded less like a question and more like a plea. I shrugged. "That's up to you. But just know, every step you take from here, you're walking on a truth someone else buried for you. You can dig it up, or you can let it rot. Either way, I'm done carrying it." I stood up, left him there on that bench, and didn't look back. That night, I pulled out a DNA kit I had ordered weeks ago, long before I left the envelope on the table, long before I ever said a word. I stared at it for a long moment, then smiled and slid it back into the drawer. Because I already knew the results didn't matter, not really. What mattered was that they thought I had taken the test. What mattered was that they believed I held the truth in my hands. That was the power, the leverage, the weapon they never saw coming. I didn't need proof. I had silence. I had implication. I had the look on their faces when they realized they'd built their lives on a story someone else had stopped believing. And that's the part people never understand. Revenge isn't about hurting someone. It's about reminding them who holds the final word. Who's been watching, remembering, calculating every slight and every silence. It's about stepping out of the shadows they forced you into and letting the light fall exactly where it should have all along. Not on the golden boy, but on the one who never needed to shine to be dangerous. And maybe, just maybe, that's the reason they're still whispering behind closed doors, still crying in garages, still wondering if the truth will ever be fully spoken out loud. The answer? It doesn't have to be. It's already done.